Hi, welcome back to my read-along of A Tale of Stars and Shadow. Today we're up to chapter 41. It's another fairly short one, and so is the chapter after it. So once again, I'm going to roll them together just so you're not hanging out too long between a couple of short chapters. So let's dive right in. The Shadowhawk's right boot sank into a puddle, and he cursed at the soft splash it made. It was an uncharacteristic error. The darkness was his shield, where he felt safe, where he could move without a whisper when he focused properly. Tonight, though, he was tired, close to the end of his strength, which was dangerous in and of itself. His quarry caught the sound and glanced back, copper mask flashing. After weeks of waiting and searching, running himself ragged in the process, he'd almost caught a killer in the act. Not in time to save the victim, whose blood spilled hot into the mud of the alley, but while the culprit still lingered, ensuring his victim was dead. The shadowy figure had run the instant the Shadowhawk appeared, fleeing into the night. He pursued without hesitation. Now the killer led him deeper and deeper into the rabbit warren of alleys in the poor quarter. The night was warm, thick, and sweat slicked his skin. The scent of refuse and sewage filled his senses, lingered in his sweat and on his tongue. It was a smell he'd never grown accustomed to, one that threatened to turn his stomach unless he focused utterly on the darkness. Ideally, his quarry would lead him to whoever was behind the killings, or at least where they were based, but he doubted they would be that foolish. The best he could hope for was to catch this one and demand some information. His mind shied away from what that might involve. He doubted it would come easily. On and on they ran, the Shadowhawk slowly closing the distance, his long strides and familiarity with the dark making it impossible for his quarry to elude him. He wasn't sure where they were now, the houses and ramshackle buildings looming on either side, the river far behind them. The more they ran, the clearer it was that the killer wasn't leading him anywhere. He was simply trying to get away. It was time to end this. The Shadowhawk sped up, closing the distance in a single bound and crashing into the killer from behind. They hit the ground, his quarry moving as they fell, throwing an elbow which hit the Shadowhawk clean in the jaw. He swore, reeling back as pain flared through his face. The man almost squirmed free, but the Shadowhawk wrestled himself back on top, trying to pin him to the mud with his weight. A knife flashed. Grunting, the Shadowhawk knocked it aside, lunging to his right to do so. The weapon clattered away, but he was off balance, and the killer brought his knee up into the Shadowhawk's ribs. The breath whooshed out of him, and he fell back, pain spearing through his chest. The killer was on his feet in an instant. The Shadowhawk lunged for his leg, locked a hand around his ankle, and yanked. The man stumbled, falling again. He leaped at him, forcing him back down, struggling, underneath him. For a moment the Shadowhawk had his quarry pinned with the weight of his knees and left arm, his right hand free to reach for the knife at his back and use it to properly quell the man. Instead, he hesitated. The man under him sensed the hesitation and renewed his struggles with more vigour. They wrestled in the mud for a few more moments, but eventually the killer slammed his head back into the Shadowhawk's jaw, sending stars flashing through his vision. Then he shoved the Shadowhawk off him and ran. Wheezing, the Shadowhawk sat up, biting his lip at the pain throbbing through his jaw and ribs. "Not much of a fighter, are you?" He pushed himself to his feet, incredulity filling his voice. "Sania? What are you doing out here?" "I was out and about, got curious at the sight of you running past. Who was that guy?" "He killed someone," he gasped, took a moment to steady his legs under him. Damn, his chest was on fire. It hurt even to breathe. "And that's a bullshit answer. You didn't just happen to see me." It was hard to tell in the dark, but he thought amusement flashed over her face. "You hunt down murderers now?" He said nothing, just stood there catching his breath. He had to focus. Focus. If he slipped, even for the briefest... Well, my curiosity is officially at an end. See you around, Shadowhawk. "What were you doing here?" His voice lashed out, sharp enough to have her turning back. Something in her expression made him ask, "Do you know who these guys are?" "What guys?" She sounded genuine. He didn't believe it. "You know what I'm talking about. Your crew. Don't try and tell me your leader isn't aware of a new group operating in Dock City." "And if we did?" she challenged. "They're killing humans. Murdering them." "And I'm supposed to care about that?" She lifted an eyebrow. "I don't know why you're bothering. Humans die all the time in the poor quarter." "I'm trying to make Dock City better for those who live here. If some new gang has their sights set on killing people for fun, then I'd like to stop them." "And what makes you think they're doing it for fun?" Her eyebrow lifted. "You know who the victims are, don't you?" He stilled. "Who?" Her bitter laugh echoed in the dimness. "I figured you have worked it out by now. You have noticed none of the victims are poor, right?" "Right." "Then let me ask you a question." She stepped a little closer. "Where do you think these well-off victims have gotten their wealth from?" His mouth tightened. You're telling me they all took bribes from the Falcons? Suspicion flared at the little shrug she gave. You know who these killers are, don't you? My people know enough to know we don't need to worry about them bothering us, and that's all we need to know. You should consider doing the same. It was a fair point. He should be focusing on his usual work, especially after the floods, but something about this new group made him highly uneasy. Tell me, Sania, were you out following me tonight, or the killer? A short, considering silence. I was asked to keep an eye out, make sure there wouldn't be a problem for us, like I said, and my report will reflect my belief that they won't be as long as we leave them alone. He pinched the bridge of his nose to try and alleviate the headache forming there. The cautious hope he'd felt after the Leia game was already fading. Talyn wasn't down here in the streets with him. Sania and her network were. Despite his suspicions about Sania's motivation, her people cared nothing beyond avoiding the patrol and getting their cut, and he refused to risk his network members, normal people with regular lives, in anything that could hurt them. Will you tell me if you learn anything more about them? He tried anyway. You know better than to ask me that. She flashed him a grin that held no warmth, then backed away into the shadows, calling back a short, "See you soon." He waited until he could no longer hear her footsteps before sinking to his knees and running his gaze over the ground. It didn't take him long to spot the knife lying in the dirt a short distance off. Bending, he picked it up, angling the metal so it caught the faint moonlight from above. It was a finely worked blade, expensive, and distinctive too. There were many smiths throughout Dock City. One of them would recognize this work. The Shadowhawk straightened and tucked the knife into his tunic. Now he had somewhere to start. Okay, that brings us to the end of chapter 41, so let's go straight into chapter 42. Tiercelin's absence from the wing was a physical and emotional ache for all of them. Talyn's fury over the Queen's arbitrary and unjust ruling seethed through her, refusing to fade even a few days later. After a gloomy practice, where the remaining wolves had put in a full effort, but without any cheer whatsoever, she returned to her room to find a courier had been and left a letter propped against her door. It was sealed with the black seal of the King's Shield and written on fine parchment. Curious, she tore it open, kicking the door shut with her foot as she walked into her room and started reading. Guard Dynan, Commander Ravanier has informed me that you were injured in the course of your duties. I hope you are recovering well, and that the Falcon was honest in his account of the fullness of your recovery. Should that not be the case, the King has made it clear you are to exercise your discretion and return home at once. This missive serves as notice of a reduction in your posting length, as per King's Shield policy on injuries sustained while on active duty. Ship passage has been booked for your return home at the end of 8 months, rather than 12 months. I have also written to the Falcon to advise him of the change. I look forward to seeing you on your return to Ryathel. Regards, First Shield Lark Sienna. Talyn stared at the letter in astonishment. She sensed her uncle's involvement amongst Sienna's carefully worded letter. There was no such King's Shield policy she'd ever heard of. The King was upset she had been hurt, and so Sienna had fabricated an injury policy to bring her home while saving face for everyone. The old Talyn would have rankled at this interference into her affairs by an overly concerned Dimnorix relative, but now she wasn't sure what she felt. She was going home early. Good news or bad? Sari inquired. I've absolutely no idea, she muttered. Then her anger swept back in. Good news. I can get out of this stupid, arrogant, feathered world sooner than expected. And return to Fireflare, to Leviana and Styria and Tarkos, to the cooler climes of Ryathel, and not being sneered at on a daily basis by every winged person she dealt with. But that also means leaving the wolves, Sari whispered. The wolves. The end of 8 months was less than 2 months away. The new recruits would only have just finished training. Theak would have to take on the next 2 lots himself. He'll be fine, you know. I know, but they've just lost Tiercelin, and now I'm going to walk out on them too. Her heart clenched at the thought. She tried to tell herself that they already knew she wasn't in Mithranar permanently, but somehow that didn't make her feel any better. Behind her, someone cleared their throat loudly. She spun, right hand dropping to her sigh. Prince Kewin leaned casually against her bedroom archway, an amused grin spreading over his face. Today he wore a violet silk vest. Were those buttons made from pure silver? And fitted ivory pants that fell to his calves. No shoes. Silver blonde hair carefully styled to enhance his natural beauty. Not here to kill you, I promise, he drawled. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you knock, she said pointedly. Her momentary surprise had turned to anger in a blink. This winged man annoyed her more than most people she'd ever met. He regularly tested her otherwise masterful self-control, which only irritated her even further. He shrugged. I didn't. Well, she folded Sienna's missive. Where I come from, that constitutes bad manners. The amused smile widened. Don't take your bad mood out on me just because you're angry at yourself for not hearing me come in. Her mouth tightened, but her control reasserted itself and she said nothing, merely staring at him with a cool gaze. He sighed dramatically and moved backwards into the living room. Is there ever a time when you're not angry at me, Captain Dynan? She bit down an angry retort. Did you want something, Your Highness, or were you just dropping by for a visit? As genuinely entertaining as needling you is, I did have a reason for coming here, Kewin shrugged. But you've diverted me, Captain, and I'm now far more intrigued by what's in that letter you're clutching. Good news? Yes, I'll be leaving sooner than expected. There was no reason not to tell him. After all, he was her charge. At the end of 8 months. You have a lover back home. He loped over to one of the front windows, staring out, his back to her. You miss him. Where had that come from? She hadn't even been thinking about Tarkos. In fact, her attention had been on his wings. Despite spending so much time amongst wingfolk at the Citadel, it seemed rude to stare, and they were unwelcoming enough as it was. Kewin caught the light, a myriad of shades of silver and white. She might even call them beautiful if he weren't such an unlikable person. Who I may or may not take to my bed is none of your concern, Your Highness. There's more, he murmured, voice turning distant. Part of you doesn't want to go home. Underneath, so much. He stopped abruptly, eyes flashing open. For a moment she saw true annoyance in his face, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. Why don't you answer any of my questions? Because I don't have to answer any of your questions, she forced calm on herself, putting a wall around her emotions so he couldn't read them. My only responsibility is to keep you alive, even when your mother takes away my wing members. So nauseatingly honourable, he frowned, ignoring her pointed comment about Tierslin. Why would anyone sign up for something like that? Potentially sacrificing yourself for a person you might not even like or respect. You wouldn't understand, she said coolly. She swore he flinched, even though it vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by a roll of the eyes and a bored huff. I've been informed that by early 9 month you'll, well, Parkson now, I suppose, have a full two guard details in rotation. They may attend me overnight, but I'll not be bothered with them during the day, and they will remain outside the tower. Overnight and at formal events and any occasion you leave the Citadel, she said firmly. I believe that's the current arrangement. Good, she said. They'll be ready. He made a face as he walked to the door, waving a dismissive hand. Don't rush on my account. Are you really sure he's a Dunmorix? Sari whispered. Talyn huffed out a breath, part laugh, part sigh. I suppose he has to be. She told the wolves first thing the next morning, knowing if she didn't do it immediately, she'd probably never get around to it. Their faces when she lined the 5 of them up before her indicated they already knew that the news she had wasn't good. I'll be leaving sooner than expected, she said, passing Theak the letter. At the end of 8 months. Orders from home. I don't have a choice. Theak glowered down at the parchment in his hand. Zamril scratched his head. Corrin stared at his shoes. Their mood plummeted even further, if that was possible. Hers followed suit. After everything she'd done to build them up, she hated that circumstance was trying to tear them back down. She hated even more that it was partially her fault. We always understood you didn't belong to us, Halun said with quiet dignity. But you will be missed, Captain Dynan. Corrin lifted his head, looking at the big man, then her. And we're happy for you, that you get to go home. The lads are right, Theak said gruffly. Now we'd best get back to practice. She nodded, searching for but failing to find anything more to say. Zamril was the last to peel away, but he caught her gaze and gave her a little wink. She swallowed. She was going to miss them too. Okay, that's the end of chapter 42. Some nice little chapters there, which we'll chat about in a second. But as always, if you'd like to avoid spoilers, then now is the point when you should jump out. And if you are jumping out here, thanks for sticking around. I hope you really enjoyed those 2 chapters, and I'll see you soon. Otherwise, let's step aside and talk about these 2 chapters. All right, so chapter 41 is another interesting Shadowhawk chapter. We come upon him in the midst of him having tracked down another killing or another killer, not in time to save the person, but in time to be able to pursue the killer as they fled the scene. The Shadowhawk's purpose, as indicated in the chapter, is not necessarily thinking that he'll be silly enough to lead Kewin or the Shadowhawk back to Vengeance's lair, but at least to kind of try and catch him and question him, learn a little bit more about this group. As focused as the Shadowhawk is on his activities in Knock City in terms of helping the citizens, stealing food, supplies, doing what he can there, he's been growing increasingly uneasy about Vengeance and their activities, and feels that it's incumbent upon him to try and figure out what's going on. Now, interestingly, as he gets into that fight with the killer and hesitates at that key moment, we know from later books, Kewin, being the Shadowhawk, is that Kewin finds violence utterly abhorrent, not just from a perspective of his principles and values, but because as a song mage, he feels everything that those around him are feeling. He's a particularly strong song mage, so he feels those things very strongly. And if he's hurting someone, that rebounds back on him. So it's actually physically very difficult for him to wound someone, to attack them, to hurt them, to use violence, because he's not only doing something his core values don't like, but also that rebounds on him magically and physically. So he feels that pain. And so he just can't bring himself at that moment to strike that blow, essentially, and that allows the killer the chance to get on top of him. Again, as the writer, when the reader doesn't yet know that the Shadowhawk is Kewin, I also had to choreograph that fight to avoid his wings coming into play, which was a little bit tricky, but also give that little bit of, I guess, laying the seeds of that later revelation, not revelation, but information that we learn about Kewin and his abhorrence towards violence. That's very much present in this scene. And of course, Sania just happens to stroll along in the middle of all this, or at the end of all this. He's very suspicious about that. And again, for those of us who've read the series, we know that she is the group. She's not reporting to anyone else. Vengeance is her network. She runs it. And she was just making sure that Kewin wasn't going to get anything out of one of her network members that just murdered someone if the Shadowhawk did manage to catch up to him. So she was kind of just really there keeping an eye on things. And as usual, she stymies him and anything he's trying to learn from her. But yeah, this scene mainly just to lay the seeds of future developments there, keeping the Vengeance storyline humming along in the background. A Tale of Stars and Shadow, the first book in this series, is very much focused on Talyn, the Shadowhawk, the development of the wolves, the bringing together of that core unit, and starting to see the unfolding politics and magic of Mithranar, and the origin of Vengeance as it starts to come to the fore. That's very much kind of a subplot in this first book. And then we move on to the chapter where Talyn receives the news from home. Her uncle Arthane's learned that she's been injured on duty, and so he's gotten Sienna to fabricate some policy about injury policy because he wants to bring her home early, and that's the Norrics moving into action. They look after their own, and he wants to see her home and safe. She's ambivalent about this. Part of her is very glad to be going home because living in Mithranar is not necessarily the easiest of things, not putting aside the difficulty she's had with building the wolves, but essentially living day to day in a place where people are constantly looking down on you, sneering at you, feeling like you're inferior, keeping in mind that she lives up at the Citadel, not down in Dock City. That's wearing after time, and part of her would be very glad to leave that. The other part of her is already sad at the thought of leaving the wolves. She kind of frames it as she feels bad about she's abandoning them or leaving them after they've already had so many knocks after Tislin's been taken away. But also in her core, she wants to be there with them and is sad at the thought of leaving, which Sari kind of hints at and kind of knows. And the chapter ends with her letting the wolves know that she will be leaving. So two rather quiet chapters, one a little bit more violent than the other, but both kind of just laying out the groundwork for what's coming next. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments on either of these, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to chat about it. Please also consider liking and subscribing and clicking that little notification bell so you get updates on when these videos are posted. Otherwise, I'll be back very soon with the next chapter. I look forward to it, and I'll see you then. Have a great day.